fundamental context, I felt like, because omniscience doesn't exist in the wide span of things, but for some reason, and this is not just so much an ableism or normalism thing, like ableism or normality, like neurotypical kind of thing. I don't mean to branch it out like that to the likes of maybe disabilities and all that, but there is an ideal that there's a handful of ideals, like I think compared to things like having an infinite number or an indefinite number of actual selves and ideal selves, compared to like speech and debate, I guess the psychology of that, of ideal and actual self. But there are ideals that you would already have in the meantime. You wouldn't just be someone who didn't have any of them at all, or too many at the same time, I would think. With fundamental context, it's like there is some kind of a way to not just with common sense if that's applicable, but there's a way to, especially in the neurotypical and autistic world, I guess you could say, there's a way you can correlate the things that you know ahead of time and things you didn't know much later, that without knowing it ahead of time, which can be a bit of coincidence sometimes, and even deeper than that. So with fundamental context, the problem was that some people, including neurotypicals, not just that example though, but including neurotypicals, happen to have this advantage where they know things ahead of time with unspoken rules, as per maybe even Tom Grant's book, of the unwritten rules of social relationships. That's a good book actually. But there are things that people know ahead of time fundamentally in that context. They know them ahead of time and they don't have to worry about them later. That's the context I'm talking about, but I can talk about that later if I can. But yeah, aural sustenance. I've always felt aural sustenance is something that you need. In my own words, it's something that you would need in order to be a good storyteller. Now, what I mean by aural sustenance, it's that aural sustenance is things that you know how to have meaning and context behind, like fundamental context in the sense, but it's knowing that there's meaning in things. While maybe not everything has as priority, not everything may be important. There is meaning in enough things that if you don't already know or feel that way, there might be a lacking of aural sustenance in that regard. So I'll talk about that later as well. Pandering to the aesthetic. This is an idea about stereotypes. I mentioned in Deep Talk episode 1. It's an idea about stereotypes where you don't, without the stereotypes or without the standards. And I just seen recently a few clips from the current comics, new comics show series, Invincible, and that's a really good show on Amazon Prime. You can watch it if you need to. I already mentioned the book from Tom Grandin and Invincible. I'm just winging these references, but Pandering to the aesthetic is the idea that stereotypes or standards, at the very least, the bare minimum, even aesthetic actually in itself, the actual art style of things, there is a reason that they exist, and they're comparable, contrastable to other things. This is why I even back up even things like materialism and all that. I mean that when they're able to compare and contrast with other things, they can still be useful even if they're not meant to happen. But yeah, I can elaborate that on another video if I need to. It is a video for this, but I can elaborate on it later on. So, duration fetish. This is not just about fear of death or thanatophobia. It's actually more like if even aside from that, we're in spite of that. It's like duration fetish is more like when you know, like with videos like this is only gonna be like a 20-minute recording that I'm gonna edit down, but for the nine philosophy ideas. But duration fetish is more like you know that something can be longer for a good enough reason. It doesn't have to be succinct or brevity wise. I mentioned this so many times before earlier in videos, but there's a reason for example, for even examples like this, like a video can be longer and still be useful and even be more than just entertaining or educational. There are reasons for it to be longer. I've always explained this. I've mentioned maybe having a deep talk video that's like 1 to 2 hours long straight up, and having higher end quality the whole time, and not being able to make that video too long, taking too long to make that video in particular. For duration fetish, yeah, it's just things that can be longer without needing to only be overstimulated. I guess not even over sexualized, I guess, but overstimulated in the sense that you know that can be longer for a good reason. So complexity was my branch of knowing that I would have philosophies that were not limited to being too deep or too extreme. It's literally using the word itself, which is still beauty in itself, but there's beauty to complexity as well as simplicity. Depends on how you orient that. It's always good enough to know how the difference between universality and sophistication. That way I've worded it before, but I've always embraced a complicated life for one thing, and another thing was that complexity was my way of expressing some philosophies in the meantime that I've had for years. Not maybe perhaps not the entire time, but I've always had brilliant ideas the whole time anyway. So as expressed by other people, but and there are people who are gracious enough to tell me that I was a very insightful person. So I can explain that later too. But crown camera. the idea about crown camera is a somewhat unfortunate and somber effect from the reality of being a spectator in life, an observer rather than an actor or creator. But it's not always that short-ended, I guess you could say it for me, my end, I guess, but be it way able to word like that. But the idea about crown camera is that you care enough about yourself that you know you're important and unique, but you also know that you're still on the sidelines for some reason. That's not the whole story, but it's like you know that it's like you can just about realize that compared to people who are action oriented but not self-important, if you're self-important but not nearly as out there rather than being in your head, I guess that's a weird way to word it. That's a very creative and insightful way to word it in my experience. I don't mean the worst thing with crown camera in particular. I just mean like there's a somber joy, like a 80% happiness, 20% depression, but like a somber joy or a somber happiness of not just tears of joy, but like that's the sibling to that idea. But the idea of somber joy, where you're just like, you know that crown camera was something that you actually cared about. But in that regard, crown camera is basically you're not a narcissist. You're not a non-doer. You're just someone who just who knows you're self-important and unique, but you don't seem to be acting or having action orientation in that regard. So that's a very interesting story to tell. Not more so than even how side could be. If that relates to me, I guess that's usually the way it originates from, but not always like that for me. So not even just me, I guess. But honor curse is terrible, man. It's when someone gives you the pride that you've earned their respect and having the journey of knowing that they forgave you, or that not even just that shallow, but like it's when they love you for something that you've done or didn't do. I've been a bit of a hypocrite about this before, contradictive, but just bear with me on this. It's like the honor curse is when they love you from a journey that didn't actually exist, and could have been, if it did exist, it could have been oriented differently because of a misunderstanding the whole time. This is heavily laced in the idea of misunderstanding, because when they don't understand that you actually weren't the person they thought you were, but that's the point in the meantime, is that you were the person that they didn't think that you were a person they didn't believe in, but that wasn't the point in particular. It just sounds like it is. It sounds like it's similar to that. That's a very complicated thing to go through. It's very weird. It's not only bad. It's again like somber joy. It's a hidden truth. It's a hidden truth that is deep, but also unforgiving, but also very remarkable and significant. Somber joy of depression 20%, happiness 80%. You know, I'll get on that later if I need to. Even in another video. Reposition 4. I was gonna say beat 4 because like music was always oversimplified like comedy. Oops, I didn't even say that romance. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get there. But reposition 4. It's when you change the position of an object even for an example, you change the position of an object 4 times, and you wonder if that's insanity or asinine. Insanity. It's like I've used these words very loosely as if I don't care about them. I know I've had on the slide I have a blank list of words where, in a Rain Man kind of way, I record words on accident because of the trauma I get from them sometimes. But even aside that, I still use the words. I'll use any of the words I'm scared of anyways, to face up my fears, or to just use them simply without worrying about them too much. If even that, we're still caring about them. But that being said, there is a reason to change the position of an object as that example. Not the only way to use this phrase, but 4 times. Because when you move it, when it's just staying there, you don't know if it's already moved. When it moves the first time, you see it, you observe it moving, but you don't know if that's the first time it moved again. Then you move it back in the same position. It's like, okay, that's kind of a take back situation, take back seat. It moves 3 times. Okay, 4 times. What's going on? You know, that's the only example that you need to know about for now. But there's much more to it than that. But just reposition 4 is just the idea of when repetition or even coordination can be more fascinating than what meets the eye. So yeah.